On a frost-bitten morning in 1818, a young maid knelt beside a trembling figure in the London fog, breaking her only loaf in two. She did not know that the ragged man before her owned every brick of the estate where she scrubbed floors until her hands bled. She did not know that her single act of mercy would unravel the cruelest betrayal of her life and lead her to a love she never dared imagine. What she did know, in that moment, was that kindness cost nothing. But she was wrong. It would cost her everything. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it's traveled. Beatrice Hartley had never known a life beyond service. Born in the servants' quarters of Ashford Manor, she had grown into a young woman of quiet beauty, chestnut hair always pinned beneath a starched cap, grey eyes that reflected the perpetual dimness of below-stairs life, and hands that bore the testimony of endless labour. At 22, she was considered fortunate by the other maids. She had a position in one of England's grandest estates, a roof over her head, and the promise of security that came with loyal service to the Ashford family. The manor itself was a monument to old wealth, its limestone facade rising from the Hertfordshire countryside like a pale fortress. Inside, gilded mirrors reflected candlelight across marble floors, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined corridors that seemed to stretch into eternity. Beatrice knew every corner of it: the cold flagstones of the scullery, the dusty silence of the library, the grand staircase she was never to ascend unless carrying something for the family. Her days began before dawn and ended long after the family retired. She polished silver until it gleamed, scrubbed floors on her knees, and pressed linens with irons heated in the kitchen fire. The work was relentless, but Beatrice performed it with a quiet dignity that had not gone unnoticed by Mrs. Pemberton, the stern housekeeper who ruled the servants' domain with an iron will. "You've a steady hand and a good heart, Beatrice," Mrs. Pemberton had told her once. "Keep your head down, do your duty, and you'll have a place here for life." A place for life. It was meant to sound reassuring, but to Beatrice it felt like a sentence. She had watched other girls come and go, some dismissed for minor infractions, others married off to footmen or grooms, trading one form of servitude for another. She had always imagined something different for herself, though she could never quite name what it was. A life where she chose her own path, perhaps, where her days were her own. But such thoughts were dangerous for a girl in her position, so she kept them locked away, like the silver in the butler's pantry, and focused on the tasks before her. The household had been in a state of heightened activity for weeks. The master of Ashford Manor, Lord Edmund Ashford, was hosting a grand autumn ball, and every servant had been pressed into preparation. Beatrice had been assigned to the guest chambers, ensuring that each room was immaculate for the arriving nobility. She had aired linens, arranged fresh flowers, and polished every surface until it shone. Lord Ashford himself was a distant figure to the servants, a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s, who moved through the manor with the quiet authority of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. He was fair, as masters went, neither cruel nor particularly kind. He simply existed in a sphere so far above Beatrice's that their paths rarely crossed. His son and heir, however, was another matter entirely. Sterling Ashford was 30 years old, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the kind of classical handsomeness that turned heads in London drawing rooms. His dark hair was always perfectly styled, his cravats tied with mathematical precision, and his manner exuded the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. He had recently returned from an extended stay in London, and the servants whispered that he had been conducting business related to the family's extensive holdings. Beatrice had served him tea once, in the library, and the experience had left her unsettled. He had not been unkind, but there was something in the way he looked at her, or rather through her, that made her feel less than human, as though she were simply another piece of furniture, useful but unremarkable. "The young master will be announcing his engagement at the ball," whispered Mary, one of the kitchen maids, as they worked side by side one afternoon. "I heard Mrs. Pemberton talking about it. He's to marry Miss Charlotte Davenport, you know, the banker's daughter from London." Beatrice had seen Miss Davenport during her visits to the manor, a striking woman with golden hair and a wardrobe that seemed to contain every shade of silk imaginable. She carried herself with the assurance of someone who knew her beauty was currency, and she spent it freely. "They say she's brought a fortune to the match," Mary continued, her eyes bright with gossip. £30,000 at least. The Ashfords need it too. All this, she gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings, costs more than you'd think to maintain. Beatrice said nothing, but she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The world of the family upstairs was one of strategic alliances and financial arrangements, where even marriage was a transaction. It seemed cold to her, loveless. But then, what did she know of such things? Her own prospects were limited to whatever man might be willing to take on a maid with no dowry and no family connections. The day of the ball arrived with all the chaos Beatrice had anticipated. The manor was transformed, chandeliers blazing with hundreds of candles, the ballroom floor polished to a mirror shine, and tables laden with delicacies that represented more wealth than Beatrice would see in a lifetime. Guests arrived in carriages that crunched up the gravel drive, their laughter and conversation filling the usually quiet halls. Beatrice and the other maids were kept busy ensuring that everything ran smoothly, refreshing drinks, clearing plates, and remaining invisible unless needed. She caught glimpses of the festivities through doorways, ladies in gowns that seemed to float as they danced, gentlemen in tailcoats discussing politics and business, and at the centre of it all, Sterling Ashford, with Miss Davenport on his arm. As midnight approached, Lord Ashford called for silence. The music stopped, and the guests gathered in the ballroom, champagne glasses in hand. Beatrice stood in the shadows near the servants' entrance, watching. "My friends," Lord Ashford began, his voice carrying across the room, "it is my great pleasure to announce the engagement of my son Sterling to Miss Charlotte Davenport. May their union bring joy and prosperity to both our families." Applause erupted. Sterling raised his glass, his expression one of satisfied triumph. But as Beatrice watched, she noticed something that made her breath catch. His gaze had shifted to someone else in the crowd, a dark-haired woman in emerald silk, who met his eyes with a knowing smile. And in that moment, Beatrice felt a cold premonition settle over her, though she could not have said why. Something about the scene before her felt wrong, like a beautiful painting with a hidden flaw. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. What did the affairs of the family matter to her? She was simply a maid, and this was simply another grand event in a house full of them. But as she turned to return to her duties, she could not shake the feeling that something was about to shatter the carefully constructed world of Ashford Manor. And when it did, the pieces would fall in ways no one could predict. The morning after the ball, Beatrice woke to an unusual stillness. The manor, which should have been buzzing with the aftermath of the grand event, felt heavy with an unspoken tension. Servants moved through the corridors with hushed voices and averted eyes, and Mrs. Pemberton's face was set in grim lines that discouraged questions. It was not until midday, when Beatrice was carrying fresh linens to the guest wing, that she learned what had happened. Two maids stood whispering near the back staircase, and though Beatrice tried to pass without eavesdropping, their words stopped her in her tracks. Can you imagine? Right there in front of everyone, he announced he was marrying Lady Vivian instead. Poor Miss Davenport just stood there, white as a ghost. I heard she fainted, had to be carried out by her father. The humiliation of it, in front of all those people. Beatrice's arms tightened around the linens. Sterling Ashford had broken his engagement, publicly. The cruelty of it was staggering. Whatever Miss Davenport's faults, no woman deserved such treatment. But the gossip did not end there. Over the following days, as the scandal rippled through the household and beyond, Beatrice pieced together the full story. Sterling had not simply changed his mind. He had been conducting an affair with Lady Vivienne Blackwood, a widow of considerable beauty and questionable reputation, throughout his engagement to Charlotte. And when Lord Ashford had discovered the liaison and demanded Sterling honour his commitment to the Davenport family, Sterling had chosen the most spectacular form of rebellion imaginable. He had waited until the moment of the engagement announcement, accepted the applause and congratulations, and then calmly informed the assembled guests that he would not be marrying Charlotte Davenport after all. He was, he declared, following his heart to Lady Vivienne, whose late husband had left her a considerable fortune and an estate in Kent. The ballroom had erupted in chaos. Charlotte's father had shouted accusations of breach of contract. Lord Ashford had gone pale with fury. And Sterling had simply smiled, offered his arm to Lady Vivienne, and walked out of his family home without a backward glance. The aftermath was devastating. Charlotte Davenport had returned to London in disgrace, her reputation in tatters. The whispers had already begun. If Sterling Ashford had found her so lacking, what did that say about her? The fact that his betrayal was entirely his own doing seemed to matter little in the court of public opinion. A jilted woman was always suspect, always somehow at fault. For the Ashford family, the consequences were equally severe. Lord Ashford had been counting on the Davenport fortune to shore up the estate's finances. Without it, difficult decisions would have to be made. And the scandal had tainted the family name in ways that would take years to repair. Beatrice found herself thinking often of Charlotte Davenport in the weeks that followed. She had not particularly liked the woman during her visits. Charlotte had treated the servants with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never questioned her own superiority. But no one deserved what had been done to her. To be humiliated so publicly, to have one's future destroyed by someone else's selfishness. It was a cruelty that made Beatrice's heart ache. The manor itself seemed to reflect the family's disgrace. Lord Ashford withdrew to his study, seeing no one. Servants were dismissed to cut costs. First the junior footman, then 2 of the kitchen maids. The remaining staff worked longer hours to compensate, and the atmosphere below stairs grew tense with worry. Who would be let go next? It was during this period of uncertainty that Beatrice's own life took an unexpected turn. She had been given a rare afternoon off, a Sunday, when her duties were lighter, and she decided to walk into the nearby village of Ashford Green. The November day was cold but clear, and she welcomed the chance to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the manor. The village was small, just a cluster of cottages around a Norman church and a single coaching inn. Beatrice stopped at the baker's shop to purchase a small loaf of bread with her carefully saved pennies, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. The baker's wife, Mrs. Fletcher, was a kind woman who always had a smile for Beatrice. "How are things up at the manor, dear?" Mrs. Fletcher asked as she wrapped the bread. "We've heard such stories." "Difficult," Beatrice admitted, "but we manage." "You're a good girl, Beatrice. I hope they appreciate you." As Beatrice left the shop, bread tucked under her arm, she noticed a figure huddled against the stone wall of the church. At first, she thought it was a pile of rags, but then the pile moved, and she realized it was a man, thin, dirty, and shivering in the cold. His clothes were little more than tatters, and his face was hidden beneath a matted beard and long, unkempt hair. Beatrice hesitated. The village had its share of vagrants, men who wandered from place to place looking for work or charity. Most people ignored them, and the constable moved them along if they stayed too long. But something about this man's stillness, the way he seemed to have given up even the pretense of begging, touched her. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Sir," she said softly, "are you well?" The man looked up, and Beatrice saw eyes that were startlingly blue, even through the grime and exhaustion. They held a depth of suffering that made her breath catch. "I'm well enough," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just resting. You look cold and hungry." Beatrice glanced down at the bread in her hands, her treat, her small indulgence. Then she looked back at the man, at the way his hands trembled, and she made her decision. She broke the loaf in 2 and held out the larger piece. "Sir," "Share my bread." The man stared at the offering as though he could not quite believe it was real. "You would give me your food? You need it more than I do." For a long moment he did not move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the bread. His fingers brushed hers, and she felt how cold they were, how thin. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea what this means." "It's just bread," Beatrice said, though she felt strangely moved by his gratitude. "I wish I had more to give." "You've given more than you know." The man's eyes held hers, and she saw something in them shift, a recognition, perhaps, or a decision made. "What is your name?" "Beatrice Hartley. I work at the manor." "Beatrice." He said it as though committing it to memory. "I will not forget your kindness." Beatrice smiled, embarrassed by his intensity. "Rest well, sir, and stay warm if you can." She walked back toward the manor, eating her half of the bread, and thought no more of the encounter. It had been a small thing, a moment of compassion in a world that often seemed short on it. She could not have known that the ragged beggar she had fed was not a vagrant at all, but the Duke of Thornbury, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England, travelling incognito to inspect his properties. She could not have known that Ashford Manor and the very ground she walked on belonged to him, and she certainly could not have known that her simple act of mercy had just changed the course of her life forever. 3 weeks after her encounter with the beggar, Beatrice received news that shook the foundations of her carefully ordered world. Lord Ashford had sold Ashford Manor. The estate, which had been in the Ashford family for 5 generations, was being transferred to its true owner, the Duke of Thornbury, who had apparently held the mortgage for years and had finally decided to claim the property outright. The servants gathered in the kitchen as Mrs. Pemberton delivered the announcement, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "The Duke will be taking possession in a fortnight. Lord Ashford and what remains of the family will be relocating to a smaller property in Bath. As for staff, the Duke's steward will be conducting interviews to determine who will be retained." A murmur of anxiety rippled through the assembled servants. Beatrice felt her stomach clench. Retained. It was a polite word for a brutal process. Some would be kept on, others dismissed, with perhaps a month's wages and a reference if they were lucky. At 22, with no family and no other prospects, Beatrice could not afford to lose this position. The following days were a blur of uncertainty. Lord Ashford moved through the manor like a ghost, his proud bearing finally broken. The few remaining family possessions were packed into trunks and loaded onto wagons. And then, one grey morning, the Ashfords were gone, and Ashford Manor belonged to someone else. The Duke of Thornbury arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, in a carriage so fine it seemed to glow against the dull November landscape. Beatrice, along with the other servants, was lined up in the entrance hall to greet the new master. Her heart hammered as she kept her eyes lowered, hands clasped in front of her starched apron. She heard footsteps, confident, measured, and then a voice she did not recognize giving instructions to the steward. The Duke was making his way down the line, acknowledging each servant with a brief nod. When he reached Beatrice, he stopped. "And you are," Beatrice curtsied, still not looking up, "Beatrice Hartley, your Grace, housemaid." There was a pause, long enough that she risked a glance upward, and then her world tilted. The man standing before her was clean-shaven now, his dark hair trimmed and styled, his clothing the epitome of aristocratic elegance. But those eyes, those startlingly blue eyes, were unmistakable. It was the beggar from the village. The man she had shared her bread with was the Duke of Thornbury. "Miss Hartley," he said, and there was something in his tone, warmth, recognition, that made her cheeks flush. "I am pleased to see you again." She could not speak, could barely breathe. The Duke smiled, a small, private expression that seemed meant only for her, and then moved on to the next servant. But Beatrice remained frozen, her mind reeling. He had known. When she gave him that bread, when she spoke to him with simple kindness, he had known who he was and who she was, and he had said nothing. The interviews with the steward began that afternoon. One by one, servants were called into the library and questioned about their duties, their skills, their loyalty. Some emerged with relief written on their faces. Others came out pale and tight-lipped, already knowing their fate. When Beatrice's turn came, she entered the library with her heart in her throat. But it was not the steward who sat behind the massive oak desk. It was the Duke himself. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Beatrice perched on the edge of the seat, her hands gripping her skirts. "Your Grace, You showed me kindness when you believed I had nothing," the Duke interrupted gently. "You gave me food from your own mouth, asked nothing in return, and treated me with dignity. Do you know how rare that is, Miss Hartley?" "I only did what anyone should do," she whispered. "But most do not." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I travel in disguise sometimes to see how my properties are truly managed, how the people who depend on me are truly treated. I have been cursed at, spat upon, and chased away with dogs. Your compassion was a gift I will not forget. I don't understand, Your Grace. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that you have a place here for as long as you wish it. But more than that," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I have a proposition for you. My aunt, Lady Margaret Thornbury, resides in London. She is a woman of considerable intellect and independence, and she has been asking me to find her a companion, someone bright, capable, and trustworthy. I believe you would be ideal for the position." Beatrice stared at him. "A companion? Your Grace, I'm a housemaid. I have no education, no training for such a role. You have intelligence and kindness, which are worth more than any amount of formal training. My aunt would teach you what you need to know, and the position would offer you something I suspect you have never had: freedom. Time to read, to learn, to discover who you might be beyond these walls." It was too much, too sudden. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because you did something for me when you had no reason to. And because I have seen enough of the world to know that people like you, people with good hearts, deserve better than to spend their lives scrubbing floors for those who will never see them." The Duke's expression softened. "You do not have to decide now. Think on it. But know that the offer stands." Beatrice left the library in a daze. A companion to a lady in London. It was a position far above her current station, one that would change everything. But could she truly leave the only life she had ever known? And what would it mean to accept such a favor from a duke? Over the following week, as the manor adjusted to its new master, Beatrice found herself watching the Duke with new eyes. He was not what she had expected of nobility. He spoke to the servants with respect, learned their names, and made changes to improve their working conditions. He increased wages, reduced hours, and dismissed the cruel head groom who had been known to beat the stable boys. The servants, who had been prepared to resent the new master, found themselves instead cautiously hopeful. This was a man who saw them as people, not property, and at the center of his attention, whether she wanted it or not, was Beatrice. He sought her out in small ways, asking her opinion on the arrangement of a room, requesting she serve his tea, engaging her in brief conversations that left her flustered and confused. She was acutely aware of the other servants watching, whispering. What did the Duke want with a housemaid? It was Mrs. Pemberton who finally spoke to her directly. "Beatrice, the Duke has made you an offer, hasn't he? To go to London?" "Yes," Beatrice admitted. "But I haven't decided." "Then let me decide for you. Take it." Mrs. Pemberton's stern face softened. "I've watched you for years, child. You're meant for more than this. Don't let fear keep you in a cage when the door is open." That night, Beatrice lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters and made her choice. She would go to London. She would step into the unknown and see what life might offer her beyond the walls of Ashford Manor. It was terrifying, but it was also, for the first time in her life, her own decision. The next morning, she found the Duke in the garden, walking among the frost-covered roses. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I accept your offer. I will go to London and serve as companion to Lady Margaret." The Duke turned, and the smile that lit his face was like sunrise. "I am very glad to hear it, Miss Hartley. I think you will find London quite different from Hertfordshire, and I think my aunt will adore you. When do I leave?" "In 3 days. I will arrange everything." He paused, then added quietly, "Thank you, Beatrice, for trusting me." As she walked back to the manor, Beatrice felt something she had not experienced in years: hope. She did not know what awaited her in London, but she knew it would be different, and different, she was beginning to realize, might be exactly what she needed. London in December was a revelation. Beatrice had never seen so many people, so much noise, so much life crammed into narrow streets and grand squares. The Duke's carriage delivered her to a townhouse in Mayfair, an elegant building of white stone with black iron railings and window boxes that would bloom with flowers come spring. Lady Margaret Thornbury was not what Beatrice expected. She was a woman in her 60s, tall and angular, with silver hair piled atop her head and eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Beatrice in a drawing-room filled with books, newspapers, and what appeared to be scientific instruments. "So you're the girl who shared her bread with my nephew when he was playing beggar," Lady Margaret said without preamble. "Sit down, child. Let me look at you." Beatrice sat, feeling thoroughly examined. Lady Margaret circled her like a general inspecting troops, then nodded. "Good bones, intelligent eyes, and Edmund says you can read." "Yes, my lady. The vicar's wife taught me when I was young." "Excellent. We'll expand on that. Can you write?" "A little, my lady." "We'll improve it. Do you know French?" "No, my lady." "We'll teach you." "What about mathematics?" Beatrice blinked. "Only basic sums, my lady." "Sufficient for now." Lady Margaret finally sat, fixing Beatrice with a penetrating stare. "Here's the situation, Miss Hartley. I am an old woman with more money than sense and a mind that refuses to slow down. I read voraciously, attend lectures, and correspond with some of the greatest thinkers of our age. I need someone who can keep up with me, challenge me, and tell me when I'm being a fool. Can you do that?" I don't know, my lady." "Honesty? Good. We'll get along fine." Lady Margaret smiled, and it transformed her severe face into something almost mischievous. "My nephew thinks very highly of you, you know. Edmund is not easily impressed. The fact that he went out of his way to bring you here tells me you're something special." Over the following weeks, Beatrice discovered that being Lady Margaret's companion was unlike any position she could have imagined. Her days were filled with reading, novels, philosophy, scientific journals. Lady Margaret hired tutors to teach her French, improve her writing, and introduce her to mathematics beyond basic arithmetic. They attended lectures at the Royal Institution, visited museums, and hosted salons where intellectuals gathered to debate everything from politics to poetry. Beatrice absorbed it all like a flower turning toward the sun. She had not known how starved she had been for knowledge, for stimulation, for conversation, that went beyond household management and gossip. Lady Margaret was a demanding teacher, but a generous one, and she seemed to delight in Beatrice's quick mind and eagerness to learn. "You're wasted as a companion," Lady Margaret declared one afternoon as they reviewed Beatrice's French lesson. "You should be teaching or writing or running something important." "I'm happy here, my lady," Beatrice said, and she meant it. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was becoming someone, not just a maid, not just a servant, but a person with thoughts and opinions that mattered. The Duke visited his aunt regularly, and Beatrice found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. He always asked about her studies, her impressions of London, her happiness, and he listened to her answers with an attention that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. "You're flourishing," he said one evening as they stood in Lady Margaret's library. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not the same girl I met in Ashford Green." "I'm not," Beatrice agreed. "I feel like I've been asleep my whole life, and now I'm finally waking up. I'm glad." His voice was soft, intimate. "You deserve to wake up, Beatrice. You deserve to see what you're capable of." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Beatrice did not quite dare name. Then Lady Margaret's voice called from the drawing room, breaking the spell, and they both stepped back. It was in March, as London emerged from winter into the tentative warmth of spring, that Beatrice's past collided with her present. Lady Margaret had secured invitations to a charity gala at Devonshire House, one of the most prestigious events of the season. Beatrice had protested that she had nothing appropriate to wear, but Lady Margaret had simply ordered her dressmaker to create something suitable. The result was a gown of pale blue silk that made Beatrice feel like someone else entirely, someone elegant, someone who belonged in ballrooms. Lady Margaret had also insisted on a new hairstyle, with Beatrice's chestnut hair arranged in soft curls that framed her face. "You look beautiful," Lady Margaret said with satisfaction. "Now remember, you're not a maid anymore. You're my companion, and that makes you a gentlewoman. Hold your head high." The gala was overwhelming. Hundreds of people in glittering finery, champagne flowing like water, and music that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Beatrice stayed close to Lady Margaret, trying not to feel like an imposter. But as the evening progressed, she found herself relaxing. Several people engaged her in conversation, and she discovered that her months of study had given her the ability to hold her own in discussions of literature and current events. It was while she was standing near the refreshment table, catching her breath, that she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well, if it isn't the little maid from Ashford Manor." Beatrice turned and found herself face to face with Charlotte Davenport. The woman looked thinner than Beatrice remembered, her beauty sharpened by bitterness. Beside her stood Sterling Ashford, his arm possessively around the waist of a woman Beatrice recognized from gossip as Lady Vivian Blackwood. "Miss Davenport," Beatrice said carefully. "Mr. Ashford." "It's Mrs. Ashford now," Sterling corrected with a smug smile. "Vivian and I married in January, and Charlotte here has been kind enough to remain a friend, despite our complicated history." Charlotte's laugh was brittle. "How could I not? After all, Sterling taught me such valuable lessons about trust and loyalty." Her gaze raked over Beatrice. "But I'm fascinated by you, Miss Hartley. How does a housemaid end up at a Devonshire House gala? Did you steal that dress?" Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Miss Hartley is here as my aunt's companion," the Duke of Thornbury said, appearing at Beatrice's side. "And I would thank you to address her with the respect she deserves, Miss Davenport." Charlotte paled. Sterling's expression shifted from smugness to calculation. "Your Grace," he said smoothly, "we meant no offense. We were simply surprised to see Miss Hartley in such elevated company." "Then let me educate you," the Duke said, his tone pleasant but edged with steel. "Miss Hartley is one of the most intelligent and compassionate people I have had the privilege to know. She has earned her place here through merit, not manipulation or family connections. Can you say the same, Mr. Ashford?" The barb hit its mark. Sterling's face flushed, and Vivian's grip on his arm tightened. Charlotte looked between them, her expression unreadable. "If you'll excuse us," the Duke continued, offering his arm to Beatrice, "I believe they're about to announce the charity auction, and I promised Miss Hartley I would explain the process." Beatrice took his arm, her heart racing, and allowed him to guide her away. Once they were out of earshot, she let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Your Grace. I didn't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything to people like that," the Duke replied. "Sterling Ashford is a fool who destroyed his own life through selfishness and arrogance, and Charlotte Davenport has allowed bitterness to consume her. Neither of them deserves a moment of your concern." "I feel sorry for Miss Davenport," Beatrice admitted. "What he did to her was cruel." It was, but her response, clinging to him, befriending his wife out of some twisted need to remain relevant, that's her choice. You, on the other hand, chose to grow beyond your circumstances. That's the difference between you. They reached a quieter corner of the ballroom, and the Duke turned to face her fully. "Beatrice, there's something I need to ask you." I've been trying to find the right moment, but perhaps there is no right moment for something like this. Beatrice's breath caught. Your Grace, I would like permission to court you, properly, with the intention of marriage, if you'll have me. The world seemed to stop. Beatrice stared at him, certain she had misheard. You want to marry me, but I was a housemaid. You're a duke. You are Beatrice Hartley, a woman of intelligence, kindness and courage, and I am Edmund Thornbury, a man who has been searching his entire life for someone who sees him as a person, not a title. You did that from the first moment we met. You shared your bread with a beggar because it was the right thing to do, not because you expected anything in return. That's who you are, and that's who I want to spend my life with. Tears blurred Beatrice's vision. I don't know what to say. Say yes, or say you need time to think, but please don't say no because you think you're not worthy. You are worth more than you know. Beatrice looked at this man who had changed her life so completely, who had seen potential in her when she could barely see it herself. And she thought of the girl she had been 6 months ago, scrubbing floors and dreaming of a different life. That girl would never have believed this moment was possible. But the woman she was becoming, the woman Lady Margaret and the Duke had helped her become, that woman could believe it. That woman could reach for happiness. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will let you court me. The Duke's smile was radiant, and as he raised her hand to his lips, Beatrice felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was free, and she was choosing her own future at last. The announcement of the Duke of Thornbury's courtship of Miss Beatrice Hartley sent shockwaves through London society. A duke and a former housemaid? It was unprecedented, scandalous, and utterly fascinating. Drawing rooms buzzed with speculation, newspapers printed thinly veiled gossip, and invitations to Lady Margaret's salon tripled as everyone sought a glimpse of the woman who had captured one of England's most eligible bachelors. Beatrice found the attention overwhelming. She had grown more confident during her months with Lady Margaret, but being thrust into the spotlight of high society was another matter entirely. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes upon her, assessing, judging, whispering. Some were curious, others openly hostile. How dare a servant aspire to such heights? But Lady Margaret was a formidable ally. Let them talk, she said dismissively when Beatrice expressed her anxiety. Edmund is the Duke of Thornbury, not some minor baronet. He can marry whomever he pleases, and anyone who objects can take it up with me. The Duke himself was unwavering in his attention. He called on Beatrice daily, took her driving in Hyde Park, escorted her to the theatre, and introduced her to his friends with obvious pride. He was patient with her nervousness, encouraging when she doubted herself, and unfailingly kind. Beatrice found herself falling in love with him, not because of his title or his wealth, but because of who he was beneath all that. A man who had disguised himself as a beggar to understand his tenants' lives, a man who valued compassion over convention. It was during a quiet evening at Lady Margaret's townhouse, 3 months into their courtship, that the Duke made his formal proposal. They were alone in the library, Beatrice curled in her favourite chair with a book, the Duke standing by the window watching the London twilight. Beatrice, he said suddenly, turning to face her, I cannot wait any longer. I had planned something elaborate, something worthy of you, but I find I simply need to ask. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my love for the rest of our lives? Beatrice set down her book, her heart full. Yes, Edmund, yes, I will marry you. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, he produced a ring from his pocket, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the blue stone the exact color of his eyes. It was my mother's, he said as he slipped it onto her finger. She would have loved you. She always said that kindness was the truest measure of nobility. The wedding was set for June, giving Beatrice time to adjust to her new role and for the necessary preparations to be made. But before the celebration could take place, there was one piece of unfinished business that Beatrice needed to address. She asked Edmund to arrange a private meeting with Charlotte Davenport. He was reluctant, worried that Charlotte would use the opportunity to hurt Beatrice, but Beatrice insisted. "I need to do this," she said, "for both of us." The meeting took place in a private room at a discreet hotel. Charlotte arrived dressed in black, her face pale and drawn. She sat across from Beatrice with the air of someone facing an execution. "Why did you want to see me?" Charlotte asked, her voice flat. "Because I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for what happened to you," Beatrice said gently. "What Sterling did was unforgivable. You deserved better." Charlotte's composure cracked. "Don't pity me, I can't bear it. It's not pity, it's empathy. I know what it's like to be powerless, to have your future decided by others. I was lucky enough to escape that. You weren't. Lucky." Charlotte's laugh was bitter. "You think it's luck that made the Duke fall in love with you? You must have done something." "I shared my bread with a stranger," Beatrice interrupted. "That's all. I didn't know who he was. I didn't want anything from him. I just saw someone in need and tried to help. That's the only thing I did differently from anyone else." Charlotte stared at her, and for the first time, Beatrice saw past the bitterness to the pain beneath. "I don't know how to be that person," Charlotte whispered. "I don't know how to be kind without expecting something in return. I was raised to see everything as a transaction." "Then learn," Beatrice said. "It's not too late. You're still young, still beautiful, still capable of building a new life. But you have to let go of Sterling, of the past, of the idea that your worth is tied to a man's opinion of you. Is that what you did? Let go." "I never had anything to hold on to," Beatrice admitted. "But yes, I let go of the belief that I was only what others said I was, and once I did that, I found out who I really could be." Charlotte was silent for a long moment. Then she stood, gathering her shawl. "I don't know if I can do what you're suggesting, but thank you for not gloating. You would have had every right to. I don't want to gloat. I just want you to be happy, Miss Davenport. Truly happy, not just pretending." Charlotte nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and left without another word. Beatrice sat alone in the room, hoping that her words had planted a seed. She would never know if Charlotte took her advice, but she had done what she could. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind. Beatrice was fitted for a wedding gown of ivory silk and Brussels lace, a creation so beautiful it made her cry when she first saw it. Edmund's friends and family arrived in London, and Beatrice met them all, some welcoming, others reserved, but all ultimately respectful of the Duke's choice. The ceremony took place at St. George's, Hanover Square, with hundreds of guests in attendance. As Beatrice walked down the aisle on Lady Margaret's arm, the older woman having insisted on giving her away, she saw Edmund waiting at the altar, his face radiant with joy. And in that moment, all the whispers, all the doubts, all the fears fell away. This was right, this was real, this was love. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, and when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Edmund kissed her, and Beatrice felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. The wedding breakfast was held at Thornbury House, Edmund's London residence, and was a lavish affair. But Beatrice's favourite moment came late in the evening, when she and Edmund slipped away from the celebration to stand on the terrace overlooking the garden. "Are you happy?" Edmund asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Beatrice replied. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. It's real. You're my Duchess now, and tomorrow we leave for Thornbury Castle. I want to show you your new home." "Our home," Beatrice corrected, leaning into him. "I like the sound of that." As they stood together under the stars, Beatrice thought of the girl she had been. The maid, with no prospects, no voice, no future beyond service. That girl was gone, transformed by kindness, education and love, into someone new, someone who could stand beside a duke as an equal, someone who had chosen her own destiny. And as Edmund pressed a kiss to her temple, Beatrice knew that this was only the beginning. The best part of her story was still to come. Thornbury Castle rose from the Devonshire countryside like something from a fairy tale, all honey-coloured stone, crenellated towers, and gardens that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Beatrice stood in the carriage as it approached, her hand clasped in Edmund's, and felt a sense of homecoming she had never experienced before. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "It's yours," Edmund replied, "all of it, and I promise you, we'll make it a place of warmth and welcome, not just cold grandeur." He kept that promise. Over the months that followed, Beatrice threw herself into her new role as Duchess of Thornbury with the same determination she had brought to her studies in London. She met with the housekeeper and staff, learning their names and their concerns. She visited the tenants on the estate, listening to their needs and working with Edmund to implement improvements: better housing, a school for the children, a lending library for the village. The tenants, who had been prepared to resent a duchess risen from their own ranks, found instead a woman who understood their lives because she had lived them. Beatrice did not pretend to be something she was not. She acknowledged her past openly, and in doing so, she gave hope to every servant and tenant who had ever dreamed of something more. But Beatrice's transformation was not just about her new title. Edmund had encouraged her to pursue her own interests, and she had discovered a passion for education. With Lady Margaret's help, the older woman had relocated to a cottage on the Thornbury estate. Beatrice established a school for girls from working families. It was a radical idea, teaching girls who would likely become servants or labourers to read, write, and think critically. But Beatrice believed that education was the key to freedom, and she was determined to give other girls the opportunities she had been denied for so long. The school opened in September, in a renovated barn on the estate. 20 girls attended that first day, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Beatrice stood before them, remembering her own hunger for knowledge, and spoke from the heart. "You are here because you deserve to learn," she told them. "Not because of who your parents are or how much money you have, but because you are human beings with minds and potential. What you do with this education is up to you, but know that it is yours, and no one can take it away." The school flourished. Within a year, they had 50 students, and Beatrice had hired 2 additional teachers. The girls learned reading, writing, mathematics, and practical skills like bookkeeping and household management. But they also learned to think, to question, to imagine lives beyond the narrow confines society had set for them. Edmund watched his wife's work with pride and admiration. "You're changing the world," he told her one evening as they walked through the gardens. "One girl at a time." "I'm trying," Beatrice said. "I just keep thinking, if someone had done this for me when I was young, how different my life might have been." "Your life brought you to me," Edmund pointed out. "I wouldn't change that for anything." "Neither would I," Beatrice agreed, smiling up at him. "But I can make sure the next generation has more choices than I did." It was in the spring of their second year at Thornbury that Beatrice received an unexpected letter. It was from Charlotte Davenport, or rather Charlotte Ashford, as she still styled herself, though rumours suggested her marriage to Sterling was troubled. The letter was brief. "Dear Duchess, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted you to know that I have taken your advice. I have left Sterling and am in the process of securing a legal separation. It has not been easy, and society has been cruel, but I find I no longer care what they think. I am using my settlement to establish a charitable foundation for women in difficult circumstances. Perhaps in time I can do some good to balance the harm I have caused. I will never be the person you are, but I'm trying to be better than I was. Thank you for showing me that was possible. Yours sincerely." Charlotte Beatrice read the letter twice, then showed it to Edmund. "I'm glad," she said simply. "Everyone deserves a second chance." "You have a generous heart," Edmund said, pulling her close. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." As the seasons turned and Thornbury Castle became truly their home, Beatrice often found herself reflecting on the strange path her life had taken. From a maid with no prospects to a duchess with the power to change lives, it seemed impossible, like something from a novel. But it was real, built on a foundation of kindness, courage, and love. She thought often of that cold November day when she had shared her bread with a stranger. Such a small act, but it had changed everything. It had shown Edmund who she was at her core, and it had shown her that compassion, even when it cost something, was never wasted. One afternoon, as Beatrice sat in the garden watching her students play during their break, Lady Margaret joined her on the bench. "You've done well, child," the older woman said. "Better than I ever imagined." "I had good teachers," Beatrice replied, taking Lady Margaret's hand. "You and Edmund gave me the tools. I just used them. You had the potential all along. We simply helped you see it." Lady Margaret paused, then added, "You know, when Edmund first told me about you, about the maid who shared her bread with a beggar, I thought he was being sentimental. But he was right. That act revealed your character more clearly than any amount of formal introduction could have. You are quite simply a good person, Beatrice, and good people, given the chance, can change the world." Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes. "I'm just trying to make sure no girl has to feel as powerless as I once did. And you're succeeding. Look at them." Lady Margaret gestured to the students, their laughter ringing across the garden. "Each one of those girls will have choices because of you. Some will become teachers themselves, others will run businesses or manage estates. And they'll all remember the Duchess who believed in them. That's a legacy worth having." As the sun set over Thornbury Castle, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Beatrice felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not been easy, and the journey from Ashford Manor to this moment had been filled with challenges and doubts. But she had persevered, had chosen courage over comfort, and had built something meaningful from the ashes of her old life. She thought of Sterling Ashford, trapped in a loveless marriage of his own making, his reputation tarnished by his own selfishness. She thought of Charlotte, finally finding the strength to break free and build something better. And she thought of all the girls who would pass through her school, carrying with them the knowledge that they were worth more than society's limited expectations. Edmund found her there as twilight deepened, and she leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange life is," Beatrice said. "How one moment of kindness can ripple outward in ways we never expect. If I hadn't shared that bread with you, none of this would exist. Then I am grateful every day for your compassionate heart," Edmund said, kissing the top of her head, "and for the chance to build this life with you." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beatrice Thornbury, Duchess of Thornbury, former housemaid and founder of a school that would educate hundreds of girls over the coming decades, smiled. She had bloomed where she was planted, yes. But more than that, she had chosen where to plant herself, and in that choice lay all the difference. True freedom, she had learned, was not about escaping your circumstances. It was about having the courage to transform them. True love was not about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It was about seeing someone's worth when the world told them they had none. And true nobility had nothing to do with titles or birth. It was about how you treated others when you had nothing to gain from kindness. These were the lessons Beatrice would carry forward, the truths she would teach her students, and the legacy she would leave behind. And as she stood in the garden of Thornbury Castle, her husband's arms around her and her future bright with possibility, she knew that every struggle, every doubt, every moment of fear had been worth it. She had shared her bread with a stranger, and in return, she had been given the world. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I want to know how far this story has traveled.